Well, folks, welcome to the channel. We're going to be talking tonight about the fall being in the air. We got some unique video coming up on a very unique lightning performance from a severe thunderstorm. And then we're going to be talking about the untold truth that's being hidden from us on a new release from the pandemic. And then we're going to be talking about the cancel culture that occurred during that time. So sit back and relax and stay with us and enjoy the video and the information that you're about to receive. Well, folks, it's good to see everybody. Folks, fall is in the air here. 64 degrees. There's no wind. Don't look like there's a cloud in the sky this morning. Now, I know you watching that this evening, but we wanted to talk a little bit this morning about how fall is in the air. And folks, it was a unique situation last night. Not last night, early yesterday morning. And I put it on video. It was something I, myself, had never seen. And that was some consistent lightning. And what was strange about it was I went and took the dogs out, and we'd just give the old big lab a bath. The other one had had his shots, and the Jack Russell Terrier was wanting to run around, and it was early in the morning. It was 5 a.m. So let them all out and everything, and they was running around the yard and doing their usual thing, sniffing and see what been around during the night and all that kind of stuff. And I just happened to look up. I thought, well, it's awful clear this morning. The stars was shining. I'm pretty sure that area that I was looking at down toward the southwest, it was looked like a very bright star, and I wondered if it might have been the space station. And then I got to thinking, well, did they ever give that thing up, or are they still working on it? But out of the corner of my eye, there was something going on. Something flashed, and I thought, well, what is that? And I stepped around the trees out to the road and began looking south. And lo and behold, there was a thunderstorm going on. And it was just continually lightning. And this went on for well over an hour and a half. Till it got daylight, you couldn't see it. As long as it was dark, you could see it. I pulled my phone out and I looked at the radar, and because I was thinking, well, they're not calling for anything today around this area. And I looked on the radar, folks, and the storm was 75 miles south the way the crow flies. And if you ain't never heard that term, if the way the crow flies, in the south, that's known as nautical miles. But nobody calls it that. They say the way the crow flies. But it's nautical miles. It's the shortest distance between point A and point B. Nautical miles is what you find on aviation charts and things to chart and plot courses for flying. But in the south, we call it the way the crow flies. So anyway, I was looking at that thing, and it was just like boom, boom. You couldn't hear it, but you could see all the lightning. So I thought that I would video it and see how it turned out. So folks, I'm gonna tag that right here, following this little segment, so you can get an idea of what was going on. time. Continual lightning. I've never seen this continual lightning like this. I noticed it when I brought the dog out, that it was doing this. I let him go to the bathroom, went back in, and let the other one out. But it is just continual lightning. And what's strange is the stars are out. But that lightning just continues to go and go. Anybody ever seen anything like this before? Just fires off continuously, it looks like. Very strange. I mean, we've been on here for 2 minutes and it's not stopped. Look at that, folks. Pretty impressive there. I got to check the radar to see what's going on. So according to the radar, this storm is about 75 miles away, a considerable distance. That must be why we can't hear the thunder or anything, but it's 75 miles south of us. That is very strange, and the radar shows it to be like burgundy red, like severe thunderstorm down that area. But this has been going on for the past 10 minutes that I saw it when we got up. And I thought, well, the stars are shining. And then down south there, 75 miles away, moving toward the coast, I guess, is this storm. And it's pretty intense according to the radar. You know it's got to be a severe storm if it's producing this kind of lightning. And I know it's 75 miles away because I know exactly where it's at. And that's the way the crow flies. Thought you folks might want to see that. So come to find out, when I got to work, I was talking to one of the fellows there in the office about it, and he said, and he drives from Raleigh west to the office a few times a week, and he said, well, you know, I saw the same storm from Raleigh, and it looked like it was down west of Fayetteville. And I said, yeah, you're correct. I said, that thing was in Rockingham, come through Rockingham and was headed toward Fort Bragg. He said, yeah, I saw it. He said, I was amazed at what I saw. He said it was just continual burst of light coming up and everything. And he said, I stopped at the gas station to get gas, and he said it was continually lighting up the sky, but there was no sound. I said, yeah, it was so far away we couldn't hear it, but the speed of light travels, and we could see the burst of the lightning from the clouds and things. So that's what made it pretty impressive. Well, folks, this week we're also going to be covering some information in the state of Virginia. We're watching and looking at some stuff. You know, Virginia claims to be the world capital of the data centers. And if you dig deep enough, folks, and get away from the narrative that the media wants people to know, you know, we try to find out what's really going on, and you can't listen or watch what the narrative is on mainstream. You've got to look for what they're not telling you. And we're discovering some stuff, folks, that they don't tell you. If it don't come across the Reuters or the Associated Press, those two seem to be the narrative, and then all of the news media that you hear and see tends to be the puppet. So the ventriloquist in the situation is the news wires, and then the dummies are the news stations. So whatever the ventriloquist says, the dummies, you know, that's what they spew. Well, we are telling what the mainstream don't want you to know, that's behind the scenes, the cover-ups and things like that, you know, they squash channels like this because of the actual truth that comes out. And we're watching Virginia very, very heavily, because there's a lot of shady stuff going on up there in that state. And, you know, it's the same way in North Carolina. And they try to cover it up and push out everything else on the people, instead of these corporations and things taking it upon themselves to pay for it. You know, right now we've seen Fauci on, this was a few weeks ago, he was before Congress. Now they've raided former FBI Comey and everything, and caught him and his wife in a lie about the 86-47 pictures and things. But here's the thing, folks, it's come out that you've got this narrative going on, but this has just been released and it's never been mentioned. So I thought we'd just mention it tonight, folks, and that is the release of the Charlie Oscar Victor Indigo Delta documents. They reveal a bigger crisis. And this is a situation where you would say when the science becomes untouchable. This was the biggest psyop in history, and it maimed millions of people. And the newly released declassified intelligence documents is reigniting one of the biggest debates of the pandemic. Folks, it was buried beneath the headlines, and what was buried is a much bigger story than they want you to know. So the director of the National Intelligence revealed that the government officials, the intelligence analysts, and the scientists were considering the possibility of a laboratory-related origin much earlier than the public was ever led to believe. So they knew there was a problem over there, and they wanted to act like it wasn't. You know, we was told it was in the market. It came from a bat, all sorts of things. Well, they knew way more, folks, than they ever said. The intelligence operatives said that, and this goes along with the people that was parroting the news media, the corrupt politicians. They created a fake story of the actual origin of that scamdemic. One of the most released or significant documents was the assessment. The report concluded that conditions consistent with a potential laboratory accident, it was high, and it existed in that Institute of Virology over there in China, known as Wuhan, and President Trump nicknamed it the Wuhan flu right out of the gate. And they tried to beat that narrative down, claiming it come from a bat and all this kind of stuff. But the researchers over there were conducting the coronavirus experiments involving human cell receptors. And that type of research, folks, created a plausible pathway for accidental exposure, and that's exactly what happens, or what happened. Now, the questions that we weren't supposed to ask during that, because it wasn't the official narrative, often came with consequences. You weren't allowed on social media to have a discussion. You wasn't allowed to mention it. You was shadow banned, canceled, kicked off the platforms and everything else, because the explanations and the public figures who raised any concerns, they were marginalized, so to speak. On our side of it, we were silenced. They didn't want the narrative to get out that it was an actual leak out of the lab. The documents that have been released, folks, provide the details linked to U.S. funding. Research supported through grants involving Eco Health Alliance included the studies of bat coronaviruses, spike protein modifications, receptor adaptation, and infection experiments involving humanized mice. Remember, in 2008, President Obama clearly stated there would be no gain of function research. What did they do? They moved it out of UNC Chapel Hill over to the Wuhan lab, and they secretly, they say, it was Fauci, moved funds around behind the backs of other people in the government and funded this research in China. Ain't that something, folks? So reasonable people like us, we weren't allowed to ask reasonable questions about any of the reality. And they wanted to say that the science was settled, so why were we still debating it? The released materials that have come out reveal the disagreement among the intelligence agencies and the scientific advisors through 2020 and 2021. They debated that the significance of genetic features within the virus and argued over competing interpretation of the available evidence. So some of the agencies that were corrupt were trying to create the narrative, and the ones that had any sense was to question them. They were trying to be squashed. A lot of it was political sensitivities, conflicts of interest, and the selection of outside reviewers, the ones they hadn't had a chance to pay off yet. Others revealed ongoing discussions about how technical findings should be communicated to the public. They were trying to hide it from us. The science was not settled, it was being debated, which exactly what science is supposed to do. But they were trying to debate it and pressure it in a way to continue this thing to push out all of the jabs. The story got even bigger. The COVID debate is no longer simply about a virus. It was about trust, transparency, and who gets to decide what questions may be asked in a free society. Now, millions of us Americans here, we watched the institutions insist that certain conclusions were beyond questions. Now they are learning that many of the same institutions were wrestling with uncertainty behind closed doors. The realization has implications far beyond the public health. The issue became credibility. And that's what they were trying to establish, was who had the credibility and who was a conspiracy theorist. They were taking away science as a tool and trying to create a narrative. Science is one of humanity's most powerful tools if it's used correctly and told the truth of the results. It's not an all-knowing authority. It's capable of answering every question about the reality. Now, that's something that they wanted to distort constantly. So then, if you question it, it become a crime. The scientific breakthrough began by challenging the accepted ideas, and the scientific progress, it depended on the skepticism, the testing, the assumption, and examining of evidence from multiple angles. Yet, during the COVID, questioning official narratives was frequently portrayed as dangerous and irresponsible, and citizens were encouraged to trust the science, while often being discouraged from participating in the very process that makes the science work. And the reason that was, folks, was the big cover-up. The dirty little secret that nobody wanted to talk about. No one approaches the evidence from a neutral position. Every scientist and journalist and policymaker and citizen brings assumption about the reality to the table. But before the facts can be interpreted, someone decided what counts as a fact and what explanations are even possible. The evidence did not interpret itself. It got interpreted for us. So there you go. Straight out of the horse's mouth. Even today, they're still trying to create a massive cover-up, even with the pardons. We saw evidence of that when they brought Fauci before the Senate or Congress, whichever it was, and questioned him for 2 hours, and he repeated 111 times that he was taking the Fifth Amendment and remaining silent. He still has a massive cover-up going on to protect those that probably didn't get a pardon, and refuses to cooperate to tell the truth because the cover-up is much bigger than we probably know. So the big push here, folks, the big hiding thing was they wanted you to trust the science. The science they created, the narrative they wanted to push, and you not question it. Well, the big question is, what if the real issue was actually the COVID? The dynamics that revealed the pandemic are appearing elsewhere. Americans encountered similar appeals to authority in the debates over energy, policy, the food system, the education, medicine, and emerging technologies. You see where this is going, folks? They don't want anybody questioning what they're doing. So they tried to create the narrative of trusting the science, trusting the government, and trusting those in charge. They didn't want anybody to question anything. They wanted you to line up like a herd of sheep and accept what they were telling you. History has repeatedly, and it demonstrates that no institution handles unchecked authority well at all. The foundation most folks here will never see. The modern world enjoys the fruits of scientific achievement. but many people fail to recognize the philosophical soil from which the science grew from. The belief that nature follows consistent laws points beyond nature itself. After all, laws imply to the lawgiver. Order implies purpose, and rationality implies a source of reason. Now, the biblical worldview distinguished between the Creator and the creation. The distinction provided a foundation for both natural law and meaningful human action with an ordered universe. And it comes to this point, folks, that morality here doesn't come from a microscope. Science can tell us how something works. It cannot tell us whether it should be done. So, folks, in this whole thing in a nutshell, this is the moment that science had forgot its place. The problem is not the science. The problem is scientism. Scientism here is the belief that science alone can provide meaningful truth about reality. It transforms a valuable method of investigation and comprehensive worldview and seeks to answer questions it was never designed to address. And what happens? Discussions about God, morality, purpose, and meaning are dismissed as irrelevancy. Yet those questions never disappear. They simply return in other forms because human beings cannot escape them. So the narrative of why trust in science and doctors has collapsed. If anything we learned during the pandemic, it taught millions of Americans that institutions are capable of making mistakes, or intentional ones. More importantly, it taught them that the institutions sometimes, resist acknowledging the mistakes. Thus, the pardons. People noticed and questioned, and all of this is discouraged. They notice when certainty is projected despite ongoing disagreements behind every door. They notice when the narrative shifts without accountability. And that's exactly what this whole thing has been, folks. Since all this happened, they don't want any accountability. Thus, all of these folks that were in the know that tried to deceive us all and force things on us, like shutting down the schools, shutting down the churches, putting on them stupid masks that didn't work, making you try to walk 6 feet behind everything, was nothing more than a science project. And when people questioned it, they were canceled out on social media. They were canceled out. Neighbor went up against neighbor. Arguments were very common among people because they wanted you to fall in line and not question anything. But people with the common sense could read the back of those boxes that those N95 masks come in, and they plainly stated they did not prevent coronavirus. Yet they would stand in the line at the door at the grocery store and try to hand you a mask that didn't work. And these people handing them out, it was kind of funny, folks. I would say, when I went up to them and they tried to give me a mask, I said, I'm not wearing one. And she said, you have to if you come in the store. And I said, have you read the box, or are you just following what somebody's told you? Have you done your research? She said, what do you mean? I said, read the first 3 lines on that box, and you read it out loud, and you tell me what it says. And she would go down through there, and she'd say, does not protect against coronavirus. I said, no need to read any further. Right there's your evidence. You have a good day. I'm going to get what I need in the store here. So you see, folks, they wanted everybody to fall in line and ask no questions. So, you can't trust the science anymore. That's why we said it's bought and paid for. Whatever data you need, whoever's paying for the study determines the outcome. You got to do your research, folks. And this new release on those documents that we just spoke about tells it all in a nutshell. Everything that we said and was called as a conspiracy theorist is now 100% true. Y'all have a blessed day. We'll see you on the next video from Deep River Farm.